We've got some very interesting news to take a look at here today involving the New York Rangers and a couple different things. First off, we're going to take a look at some injury news involving a certain Rangers player, and we have an update on about how long they could be out for and how much time they could end up missing. And also, we've got a bit of a trade update here with a bit of news involving a certain New York Rangers superstar player who has had his name involved in a lot of trade talks, and about him possibly getting traded away to a division rival if the Rangers aren't necessarily, way into the playoffs or really competing for a playoff spot around the deadline. So let's take a look at this news, and we're going to start off here with the update involving the injured player, and of course that is Matt Rempe, who unfortunately it does seem like is going to be out for quite some time, as Vince Mercogliano does post on X saying, got a little clarity on the Matt Rempe injury. My understanding is that he'll be out for multiple weeks, if not months. It's not considered season ending, but I'm not expecting a return until some point later in the season. So that is definitely not what you want to hear. Of course, I think, Matt Rempe may not be an absolute kind of true top player for this Rangers team, but I think he's been a part of a pretty incredible fourth line for the Rangers, and I would say the most consistent forward line out of the four has definitely been the fourth line, made up of Adam Edstrom, Sam Carrick, and Matt Rempe. The Rangers forwards, of course, haven't been too great this season, as the offense has really been stalled and just hasn't really been able to get going there. And, I do think the fourth line of the Rangers has, just been the most consistent there. Game in and game out, they're playing some good, solid hockey. They're not doing anything too flashy, which I don't expect from a fourth line, but they're just playing some good, solid hockey. They're not making a bunch of big mistakes. They're giving up a bunch of crazy, high danger chances there. They're playing some solid defensive hockey. They're bringing some energy. They're playing physically. I mean, every single game, you're seeing a guy like when they're out there, Matt Rempe, Adam Edstrom, or Sam Carrick, at least, two of the three there, it feels like, are laying some pretty massive hits there, especially, more so a guy like Carrick, who I think has laid a bunch of massive hits there. They've been a really physical and tough line so far to begin this season, and I just think this is a line that has been really solid for this Rangers team. So losing a guy like Matt Rempe, I definitely think will be a loss, but of course, this team still should be able to function without him. I do think, though, obviously, it's going to have an impact on the overall depth of this team a little bit there, but all in all, it just does suck to see Matt Rempe having to miss quite a bit of time, it does seem like. And next up here, we've got the trade news involving Artemi Panarin, the New York Rangers, and the Carolina Hurricanes, as that is the team that Frank Seravalli does mention when discussing this situation on the Open Ice podcast/show, where he was basically asked by a fan kind of saying that maybe, the Calgary Flames could end up trading Nazem Kadri to the Carolina Hurricanes, and then Frank Seravalli basically said, I don't know about that, but then he went on to say, I could see Panarin as a Kane, though. That's one name to keep an eye on for the Carolina Hurricanes. We know they want to be aggressive. That's one guy I'd be keying in on if the Rangers continue to hover in the very bottom of the standings. Could they convince Artemi Panarin to go to the Carolina Hurricanes, and what would that look like? Because I think that would be a great fit, particularly for a team that also has some Russians. And I also do think that could make a little bit of sense there. I mean, I don't think it's the absolute perfect fit for the kind of style of play that they do have, but of course, we do know that the Carolina Hurricanes have, I would say, their main kind of problem at moments has been, of course, the lack of scoring. At moments during the playoffs, of course. So I think maybe adding in a guy like Panarin to an already, pretty phenomenal kind of stacked team there, top to bottom. They've got some great depth, some great overall talent. You have some star players, really good players, of course, but also they've just got a really well-rounded kind of defensive team. So adding in an offensive player like a Panarin, who obviously isn't going to bring a whole lot defensively or physically, but is joining a team that already has a bunch of that, and you're being that kind of more offensive guy joining that bunch there, maybe that could end up working out quite well. And they do have some really good, defensive forwards as well that they could, put Panarin alongside potentially to kind of help, negate some of that negative defensive play from him. But I think overall, this is a trade that could potentially make sense if the Rangers are in a spot where they're looking to sell and they're not looking to bring back Panarin, of course. And either way, even if the Rangers are pushing for the playoffs there, I could see a scenario where it does make sense to trade away Panarin still, although I don't know if that team would be the Carolina Hurricanes in that situation where if Rangers are competing for his playoff spot there, they're probably not looking to trade away Panarin to a division rival, but maybe there's another team out there, maybe in the Western Conference, that'd be interested in Panarin, possibly trading for him, then giving him an extension, the Rangers get back some solid pieces. That could be a possibility, but I think as a whole, this is a trade, though, that definitely could make a bit of sense there for both sides, both teams there, and Panarin as well, honestly. So maybe there is the possibility of seeing a trade happen, but we're going to take a look at now some of the players that could possibly be involved in some kind of a package for Panarin if a deal did end up materializing. And I don't think it's necessarily going to happen. I just think this is obviously a possibility that maybe it could happen. It's probably not, but there are some very interesting players that I think could come back in a package for Panarin that could really be enticing for a Rangers team that, really could use an influx of kind of youth into this team that does have a lot of older players, already on it and locked up on some longer term deals. So first off, I think a guy like Andrei Svechnikov, he's had a rough year so far. He's only got one goal to begin this season. So I think he's definitely a guy who maybe could be involved in a trade, although he's not necessarily a guy who I'm, desperately wanting to see come back in a trade here. He's got like a $7.75 million cap hit for another 4 years. He does have a modified no trade clause, and although he is a pretty skilled player and is quite talented, I just don't think is the right fit for this Rangers team. He is fairly young, so that does kind of, fit the timeline that the player I'm kind of looking for, but to me, he's too streaky of a player. This is quite evident of that, and there's lots of evidence of that happening in past years as well. He's also a guy who's missed some time with injury in past years. He is a player who's not necessarily a line driver. He's not going to kind of take over a line there and really kind of, be the main focal point of the offense on that line, I don't think. And he's not going to bring much defensively or physically as well. So to me, this is not a winger that I'm looking to add in to this Rangers team right now. I think he wouldn't be the worst ad in the world, come back in a package alongside some maybe other assets for Panarin. But to me, this is not necessarily a player that I'm absolutely kind of wanting desperately this team to go after because, like I said, I think he definitely has some flaws in his game, and I just don't think it's the right fit for this Rangers team. Next up here, we've got Alexander Nikishin, and I think he's a player that the Carolina Hurricanes are probably definitely not looking to move in a trade, especially in division with the Rangers, but this is a big 6'3" left-handed defenseman. He's over 200 pounds. He's only 24 years old, turned that early October. Of course, he came over kind of near the end of last season there, kind of came in for the playoffs there with the Carolina Hurricanes, got a bit of a run with them in a few games there. Of course, has played 9 games so far with the Canes in the regular season this year, and he's got 4 points already. He's a really solid defenseman, and I think he would be a pretty phenomenal ad. Now, of course, like I said, I don't think it's too realistic that he'll be involved in a trade because I think the Carolina Hurricanes are probably pretty high on the guy, but if he were to be available in a trade for Panarin, I would be absolutely all over that. This is a need for the Rangers, is adding in a top 4 caliber left-handed defenseman, and I think he's definitely capable of that potentially for this Rangers team. So obviously, if he was, a possibility to come back in and trade for Panarin, I think that could be a really interesting piece to get back, and could be a really good one for the long-term future as well if the Rangers were able to somehow get a trade done there. And there are some other prospects that I think could be involved, like a Bradley Nadeau maybe, but other than that, I don't think there's a bunch of actual NHL players that really make a whole lot of sense to come back in a trade. Like a guy like the Jackson Blake there, I just don't think makes a whole lot of sense. They just gave him an extension there. He's a young guy, locked up long term. He's not going anywhere. Logan Stankoven, same thing. So I don't really think there's a bunch of other guys that are necessarily available. Jesperi Kotkaniemi is not someone who I want to see come back in return. So to me, I think the two best options to really come back, I guess, are Nikishin or Svechnikov. But to me, I don't really want Svechnikov. So if the Rangers are making this kind of a trade here, I would want Nikishin back, but it's probably, of course, not going to happen. So at the end of the day, I just don't think this trade necessarily makes enough sense for the Rangers unless there is some other piece coming back that really is enticing, I guess. But to me, unless you're getting Nikishin back, this probably isn't the best trade for the Rangers to make. Although, if they do want to just get something for him, and it is, like Nadeau and another prospect or two and some picks, maybe it makes sense, depending on where the Rangers are at, of course. But at the end of the day, ideally, this team isn't a spot where they're, deep into a playoff spot there come trade deadline time. They're adding to this roster, and ideally, they're going on a bit of a playoff run with Panarin on this team. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post a video about the New York Rangers every single day at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And also, definitely don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on the Matt Rempe injury news and also the Artemi Panarin kind of trade news and maybe him possibly being traded away in division to the Carolina Hurricanes. Let me know your thoughts. I'll catch you next one, and let's go Rangers.